Daystar's announcement of Joni Lamb's memorial did not arrive like a quiet family notice. It landed like a flare shot into a dark sky, illuminating everything around it at once. Grief, loyalty, suspicion, memory, rivalry, faith, and the uncomfortable question of what happens when a ministry built on intimacy becomes a stage for public accountability. What might once have been read as a simple invitation to a service quickly became something much larger, because this is no ordinary legacy being mourned and no ordinary audience receiving the news. For decades, Joni Lamb lived in the rare space where televangelist, broadcaster, wife, mother, and executive all blurred into one public identity, and that made her passing feel personal to millions who had never met her but believed they knew her. That same intimacy is now the source of the tension surrounding her memorial, because people who were invited into the Lamb family's world for years are now asking hard questions about who is speaking, who is missing, who is in charge, and whether the story being told in public matches the reality that unfolded in private. The memorial itself, scheduled for May 18 at Gateway Church in Southlake, Texas, carries significance that goes far beyond logistics. A venue choice like that is never just about seating capacity, though capacity matters. It is also about symbolism, alliances, status, and tone. Gateway is a heavyweight in evangelical circles, a place associated with influence and reach, and that alone signals that the service is expected to draw far more than a handful of close relatives. It tells the world this will be a major gathering, the kind of event where ministry leaders, partners, donors, colleagues, and curious observers all come together under one roof, each carrying their own version of the story. For some, it will be a moment of prayer and remembrance. For others, it will be an audit of the network's soul. The choice of venue suggests that Daystar understands the scale of the moment, but it also means there will be nowhere to hide. In a smaller setting, emotions may have been allowed to settle into the background. In a place like Gateway, every gesture becomes public language. The timing of the memorial only deepens the sense that this is a watershed moment. 11 days after Joni Lamb's reported passing is a remarkably short window in the public imagination, especially for a figure whose life was so intertwined with an organization, a family, and an audience. The speed can be interpreted in different ways. On one hand, it reflects the urgency of grief and the practical need to bring people together while the shock is still fresh. On the other hand, it creates a feeling of motion before resolution, as though the public is being asked to move from death to ceremony before all the emotional dust has settled. That tension matters because the story surrounding Joni Lamb is not only about her death, it is also about the conditions surrounding it, the visible signs that people now say they saw in hindsight, and the unresolved family and leadership questions that have been hanging over the ministry like a low cloud. The memorial becomes the first major public attempt to frame her final chapter, but the audience is not passive anymore. Supporters and critics alike are reading the moment with heightened attention, looking for clues in everything from the seating arrangement to the order of tributes. The Daystar social media announcement tried to speak in the language of gratitude and shared mourning. It thanked viewers for prayers, memories, and support, and it leaned hard into the idea that Joni loved sharing her life with the audience. That line is emotionally effective because it is true in a broad sense. She did share her life publicly. That was part of her gift and part of her appeal. The Lamb family did not build a television ministry by remaining distant and polished in the old institutional way. They built it by letting viewers feel close. They opened the door, walked the audience into their world, and made faith feel conversational and immediate. That approach helped Daystar become a powerhouse, but it also meant the audience would eventually feel like more than spectators. They became participants in the emotional economy of the ministry. They prayed, donated, celebrated, and identified with the family's milestones. So when the announcement says it would not be the same without you, it is not just a kind gesture. It is an acknowledgement of how the network has always operated. The viewers are not merely consumers, they are part of the story's architecture. But that same closeness now works against the ministry because closeness creates expectation. People who feel invited into a family's life for 30 years do not calmly accept silence when the family appears fractured. They do not accept vague language when the details matter. They do not easily dismiss reports of exclusion, last-minute phone calls, or decisions that appear to sideline certain relatives. That is why Jonathan Lamb has become such a central figure in the public reaction. Whether every report circulating online is fully accurate or not, the emotional logic is straightforward. If a son was truly cut off from his mother's final moments, or informed late, or treated as a secondary figure in a moment that should have been defined by family, then the event ceases to be only about mourning and becomes a question of honor, duty, and betrayal. The public does not need the full legal record to react to that possibility. It already understands the moral shape of the story. A grieving son, a powerful executive structure, an uneasy transition, and a memorial that may either restore or deepen the wound. The ingredients are all there, and they are combustible. What makes Jonathan's role so important is that he is now more than a son in the eyes of many observers. He has become a symbol of continuity, or perhaps a symbol of resistance. If he is visibly embraced at the service, if he is given a voice, if he is acknowledged in a meaningful way, some will read that as a small step toward healing. If he is kept at the margins, the narrative of exclusion will harden. In the modern media world, symbolism often outweighs explanation. The public is no longer satisfied by the claim that everything is complicated behind the scenes. Of course it is complicated. But complexity does not erase the need for visible truth. People can handle nuance. What they reject is the feeling that the essential reality is being managed rather than faced. That is the deeper crisis Daystar is confronting. This is not simply a family conflict. It is a crisis of credibility in a world where credibility is one of the few currencies that still matters. The scrutiny is sharpened by the broader history of Christian broadcasting. Large ministries have spent decades cultivating trust through warmth, testimony, and moral certainty, but the public memory of scandals has made audiences far less forgiving when the private world does not match the public message. The televangelist era has produced unforgettable successes and equally unforgettable collapses, and every new controversy is filtered through that history. Once audiences have seen enough institutional secrecy, financial opacity, leadership insularity, or family succession disputes, they stop assuming that polished public communication equals healthy internal culture. They begin asking whether the language of faith has been used to shield the language of power. That suspicion may not be fair in every case, but it is now deeply embedded in the public imagination. So when a ministry like Daystar announces a memorial during a period of internal tension, people naturally read the moment against that larger backdrop. They are not just asking who will speak. They are asking what kind of organization is still standing behind the speech. Joni Lamb's private health struggles have also become part of the conversation, and in some ways that is the saddest layer of all. Viewers who watched her for years are now revisiting old footage with a different eye, trying to understand what they may have missed. That instinct is natural. After a public figure dies, people often search the past for signs that were invisible at the time. They remember wardrobe choices, movements, expressions, and the tone of a voice. They reinterpret what once seemed minor and ordinary. In Joni's case, some supporters have pointed to visible discomfort, clothing choices that may have concealed physical changes, and moments where her energy appeared subdued. Whether those observations were accurate markers of illness or simply the normal fluctuations of aging and fatigue is something only those closest to her could fully know. But the emotional effect is real. It creates a narrative of hidden suffering, and hidden suffering always invites grief mixed with frustration. Audiences do not like learning, after the fact, that someone they cared about may have been struggling behind the polished surface of a public image. It makes the whole system feel more fragile, and in this case, more human. That human dimension is what makes the memorial such a delicate event. At its best, a service like this can do what memorials are meant to do: gather grief, honor a life, and create a shared space for remembrance. At its worst, it can become a performance of stability designed to quiet concerns rather than address them. People can usually tell the difference. They know when a room is open to emotional truth and when it is being used to stage emotional control. That is why critics fear the memorial could be used to project unity without actually practicing it. The concern is not merely cynical. It comes from observing how institutions behave under pressure. When a ministry is faced with intense public attention, the instinct is often to reduce complexity, smooth over conflict, and frame the moment in language that protects the brand. Yet grief rarely responds well to branding. Mourning is messy. Families are messy. Succession is messy. And when all three are tangled together inside a large media ministry, the result is almost always visible. Still, it would be unfair to reduce this entirely to institutional maneuvering. There is a real family here, and a real loss. Joni Lamb was not simply a corporate figurehead. She was, for many people, the face of a long-running emotional relationship with Daystar. She represented a certain style of Christian media: direct, familiar, aspirational, and deeply personal. She was part of a generation of faith communicators who understood that television was not just a platform but a form of pastoral presence. Her influence extended beyond broadcasting because she helped define what it looked like for a family to become a ministry brand without completely losing the sense of domestic intimacy that made the brand work in the first place. That legacy deserves acknowledgement even from those who are skeptical of the structures that grew around it. Whatever else happens around the memorial, that contribution remains part of the story. The question now is whether the memorial service will allow that legacy to breathe or whether the surrounding controversy will consume it. The answer may depend on something as simple as tone. If the tributes are warm, specific, and humble, the service could offer a moment of genuine grace. If they are overly polished, evasive, or clearly choreographed to avoid tension, the audience will notice. They always do. Modern viewers have developed a sharp instinct for institutional performance, especially in religious spaces where sincerity matters so much. They can sense when a speech is written to protect stakeholders rather than tell the truth. They can sense when a family is speaking through grief and when an organization is speaking through strategy. The two voices are not the same, and at a memorial, the difference becomes especially important. There is also the matter of leadership and succession, which lurks behind every major question surrounding Daystar's future. Whenever a founding figure dies, the institution built around that person faces a test. Can it survive without the personality that made it coherent? Some organizations adapt gracefully. Others fracture because too much authority was tied to too few people. Daystar now appears to be in that vulnerable middle space where the founder is gone, the legacy is contested, and the next chapter has not been fully defined in the public mind. That uncertainty invites speculation because people know a power vacuum when they see one. They also know that religious organizations can be especially unstable during transitions because spiritual language can hide bureaucratic struggle. Who controls the narrative controls the memory, and who controls the memory often controls the future. That is why the memorial is more than a farewell. It is also a contest over interpretation. In the end, what makes this story resonate so strongly is that it touches on a universal truth larger than the ministry itself. People want the institutions they trust to be honest with them, especially in moments of grief. They may forgive weakness, disagreement, even failure. What they struggle to forgive is the feeling that the truth was edited for their benefit. That is why Daystar's memorial announcement carries such weight. It is not just an invitation to remember Joni Lamb. It is an invitation for the public to decide whether the ministry still deserves the trust it built over decades. The answer will not come from a press release alone. It will come from what happens in the room, who is honored, who is heard, and whether the service feels like a genuine act of remembrance or another layer of careful management. Joni Lamb's death marks the closing of an era, but the way the memorial is handled may determine whether the next era begins in honesty or in further confusion. That is the hard, unadorned truth at the center of this story. A life that was lived in the glow of public ministry has now become the subject of public reckoning, and the people watching are not just mourners. They are witnesses. They are weighing legacy against leadership, memory against control, and grief against credibility. In that sense, the memorial is not only a goodbye. It is a test of whether the values preached for years still survive when the spotlight turns cold and the family is left to stand beneath it alone. Subscribe for more deep dive reporting and thoughtful analysis.